Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is JT, and if you are hearing this, you have once again tuned into the Consequence of Habit podcast. Hey, like always, this podcast is brought to you by our friends at Athletic Brewing Company. In my opinion, the finest NA beer that you're going to get out there. Actually, I'm just going to say one of the finest beers out there. These guys were big in my journey of kicking that nasty habit of alcohol. Fortunately, I didn't have to kick the habit of drinking amazing beer. These guys, they give you your cake and eat it too. So whether you just don't drink, but you still love the taste of beer, or maybe you love the taste of beer, but you got something going on the next day. You got a business meeting, you got a sporting event. I don't know, maybe you got to drive your family somewhere and you don't want that poison running through your system. Well, please do yourself a favor. Check out athleticbrewing.com. And if it's your first time ordering, use the Consequence of Habit exclusive promo code of capital COH20 and get 20% off your first order. Hey, this is a big one. You know, it's not too often you get to grow up watching somebody compete at the highest level in your favorite sport, and then at some point get to sit down and pick their brain about it. If you've heard my podcast before, you know I'm a fan of cycling. I love road biking, mountain biking. The Tour de France, oh, come on, man. I forget about it. I watch every stage. And when I was younger, I watched it, and then one of my favorite riders was this week's guest, Mr. Sean Kelly. He's got 193 professional wins. The man's won the Paris-Nice 7 years in a row. Tour de Spain in 88, Paris-Roubaix, 84, 86. The man's career spanned from Eddie Merckx to Lance Armstrong and all the craziness between that. It was a pleasure to talk to him. He was very open about the pressures that go along with being professional cyclists. And we've seen recently, those pressures have been too much for some of the riders now. And he really walks us through on why that is. And he's still involved in cycling. He's Eurosport's commentator for the Tour de France. He's just launched a new product called Indoor Velo. An Indoor Velo is a mounting system for your handlebars where you can mount on your laptop or your iPad or your phone or really all of them. You know, in this crazy world of a pandemic, we can't always get out and ride with our friends. Or maybe it's just crappy weather. You know, you put this stuff on. We've got different apps to reach out to your partners, whether it's Zoom or whatever it may be. You still get the experience of riding with your friends. You know, I've checked this thing out, and it is, first of all, it's like bomb-proof. This thing, I mean, if you're going to mount your computer or something, you really want to make sure it's something that's going to stay on there. And this product does exactly that. So please check out Indoor Velo. Check out their Kickstarter. They're trying to get this thing going. I think it's an amazing product. I think it's going to take off. But without further ado, please welcome Mr. Sean Kelly. All right, ladies and gentlemen, man, this is a true honor. We have on former professional cyclist Sean Kelly. Sean, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, good to be on. Good afternoon.
You know, there's not many times you get an opportunity to grow up watching somebody, look up to them in the world of sport, and then have an opportunity to sit down here and talk to them. I actually saw you race. I was in Milford, Pennsylvania. I must have been in the late 80s, or you were at the Tour de Trump, correct?
Yes, that's right. That would be right.
Yeah. This is wild. So, you know, most of a lot of the listeners here are cycling fans, but just so I want to make sure everybody knows the magnitude of the guests I have on today. Sean has won 193 professional bike races. He's won the Paris-Nice 7 years in a row, was ranked number one cyclist in the year, number one cyclist 5 years in a row, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. So, but Sean, I want to start this off with a story of how you saved me probably getting my nose broke one time in a bar in Germany. I was about maybe 19 or 20 years old. I was in the military and I was on my way over to go to Kuwait. And I had a layover in Germany, and like most 19 and 20-year-olds, the first thing I did is I went to the bar. I had, I'm sure, too many beers, and myself and a couple Irish guys started getting into a heated discussion that looked like it was going to escalate quickly. And I mentioned your name because I grew up a cycling fan, right? And I mentioned your name, and one guy stopped. He says, "You know who Sean Kelly is?" I said, "I do." I said, "I've watched him, in the Tour," and I mentioned a couple races. Man, if that didn't just calm everything down instantly. So it was at that point I realized how important your name was within the country of Ireland. So in a roundabout way, I want to say thank you for preventing me from probably taking a good whooping in K-Town in Germany. So, but I want to get into it. And when I research your career, Sean, I think it's actually a perfect fit for this podcast, because the podcast is called Consequence of Habit, and it's exactly that. We talk about what we do every single day and whether that's brought success to your life or really the complete opposite of. And when I look at your career and I see where you came from, a really rural area, a farming area, and to reach the heights that you did. And that's really where I want to start. If you could go back to your childhood growing up, and then how that kind of evolved into the world of cycling. And did you understand the path that you're on when you started?
Well, yeah, first of all, growing up, down Southern Ireland on a very small farm, my mother and father, they had to work very hard to rear the family. We're four sons, so they had four, hungry sons to feed. And the moment you were able to, do some work, give some hand out on the farm, you were pulled into it, and that meant, 8 or 9 years of age. And it was pretty much the same for all of us in the family. Maybe I had to do a bit more. Maybe I was more keen to do it, I don't know. But that's my upbringing. So, went to school down the road, about 2 miles down the road, to a small school out in the countryside. Played the normal sports at school, like Gaelic hurling, football, things like that. And that was the normal thing going to school. But then I started when I was about 15 and a half. The club in Carrick-on-Show, which was a local town about 4 miles away, they were starting races for young kids, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And my brother, Joseph, who was 2 years older, he started off. And then I followed him and won a number of weeks, or maybe 2 months later. And I started with some of my classmates, and that's how it all began. And the reason they started having races for 15, 15-year-olds is there was a club in Carrick-on-Show for many years before that, but they had a bit of discussion with the committee, and there was a bit of a row broke out. So there was part of the club went away and started another club in the town. And that's when I started off with those people who wanted, to start it from grassroots again.
So cycling where you were, this sounds like it was somewhat of a big deal. Because as a kid growing up in the U.S., cycling was this kind of niche thing. It wasn't it wasn't very popular at all at the time. Was that something that was just was it followed in the newspaper? Was it a pretty popular sport?
No, it was a very minority sport, and the club in Carrick-on-Show, it was running from the first club there, the original club that was there for many years, but you did not hear a lot about it. And living out in the country, of course, you might see something in the local paper about the races when they began in the summer, how the guys were doing. There might be a small snippet if one of the guys won the race or was doing something good. But the exposure would have been very, very small at that time. So yeah, it was just a bit of luck really that my brother first of all got involved, and then I got involved because of the circumstances within the club, obviously, breaking up and a new club forming. So I suppose that was good. The good luck for me that that did happen, because otherwise, my brother or myself never might have got involved in cycling. We might just continued on doing the normal sports that the younger generation would be doing at that time.
Yeah. Did you find even in other sports that you had an ability that others didn't, or would you compare? How would you compare yourself as in other sports to your peers around you?
Well, at school, when I was playing the other sports, I was quite good. I wouldn't have been outstanding by any means, but yeah, pretty good. And then when I went to the cycling, the first race I took part in, of course, it was sort of a handicap race, depending on what sort of bike you had, because everybody didn't have a racing bike. It was just a normal bike that you used getting to school. So it meant a big heavy steel bike, and that's what I started off on. And my first race with some of my friends, it was probably about 12 or 15 miles, and we would be allowed off maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes ahead of the ones who had been racing for quite a number of weeks already. And I remember I was left off with a few guys, and we went off, and I went off, and won the race. But then from then on, I was handicapped down, and the time I was giving was minimum from there on. So I didn't win a race again for many months. Even that year, I don't think I was winning any. So I wasn't any great, or I didn't stand out from the rest of the guys in the club. It took me probably a year or two to really to get into the sport, and with the racing and a little bit of training, whatever little bit of training we were doing, then it started to show, I think, after about 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, cycling is one of those sports. I mean, especially now, where equipment can really make such a substantial difference. You mentioned coming from a small village. How do your parents react when you say, "Hey, I'm really getting into this bike racing. I'm going to need a better bike"? Because anyone who's followed cycling know that can be quite expensive.
Yes, well, my father hated it. First of all, when my brother started, and he wasn't one of the sons that was doing a lot of work. Joseph, he was doing the minimum work on the farm. So when he started biking, he wasn't missed that much. But when I started off, oh my God, my father was giving out, because there was always work to be done on the farm. The cows had to be milked, the pigs had to be fed. So when I was going away to races, a little bit later on, when I started off, it was just local stuff in the village of Carrick-on-Suir. So it meant the Sunday afternoon, it was in the earlier part of the year when the evenings were very short. But then when the evenings started getting longer, they had races. I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday evening. So it wasn't so bad, because I was, maybe away for 2 or 3 hours maximum. But then a bit further on, I started traveling to races around the country, and that meant going away on a Saturday morning and being gone for the total day, and maybe Sunday as well. And that was where the problem was with my father, because he was always saying, well, there's work to be done, and you're going away on that bike to those races. So he wasn't in favour of it all at the beginning. It took quite a number of years until I started, winning some races and maybe becoming junior champion of Ireland. And then people started talking. And I think then they realised that, I was probably, quite good, and I had something special. And it wasn't so bad from there on. But in the beginning, the earlier days, it wasn't liked at all by my parents.
Yeah, I imagine not. At what point, so you start racing, who are your idols at this time? And at what point did you really say, I'm going to make a go at this, of making a professional career out of it?
Well, when I started off, I didn't know a lot about cycling. And, I knew Eddie Merckx, of course, because in the Irish papers, in the national paper, you get a small snippet of a number of lines. Eddie Merckx wins the Giro d'Italia, or he wins the Tour of France, for the third time or the fourth time, whatever. So I knew the name. But other than that, I knew very little about cycling. And, my brother Joe, he knew very little also. But then we started getting interested in it and getting cycling magazines. And, cycling magazines from the UK, there was a one which is still going, Cycling Weekly. And that was the one they used to get in the club. And, I remember one of the guys who was getting the club, and he just give it around then. So it would go around between maybe 10 or 12 people. Mm-hmm. So you might get it 3 weeks later. And, I started reading that, and my brother Joseph as well. And that's when we learned more about cycling, what was happening in across the sea in the UK, but also in mainland Europe, talking about the classics, depending on what time of year it would be. And then, of course, the Tour of France when you get into the summertime. So slowly then we started learning about the names and, who was winning these big races. And, then, my knowledge of the sport started to grow. But, when I was 16, 17, the amount that I knew about cycling compared to now, the younger generation now, 14, 15-year-olds, they know so much about the sport. Even, when I meet underage cyclists, they can tell me so much about the sport now. It's amazing. But that's because of all social media. They can learn so quickly. But in my day, we didn't have that at all.
Do you look back at that and think that was possibly an advantage? Because now I imagine when you know so much, it adds that much pressure going into the sport. If you come in, they say ignorance can be bliss at times. Do you think that's maybe less pressure of not being so inundated with cycling information?
Well, it's certainly maybe better because I think you're prepared to learn then. Because when you're somebody that not know a lot, and I certainly knew the minimum compared to the guys in Belgium, for example, or in France. In those countries, they had more support. I think the club wise, and the sport was more popular, so they were able to read about it in the national papers and the local papers and the radio and TV and that. So even the youngers coming in at 14, 15, 16, they would have known a lot more than I would have at that same age. But for me to start off, very green, I think it was a good thing. And I was, really prepared to learn. But I think it can work both ways because, if you're not experienced when you come in nowadays, especially, well, then you can lose out very quickly. You can get left behind. But I think back in my time in that era, I don't think it was a problem. If you had the ability and they see that, I think they were prepared to work with you, and you had the time. Where now it can go by very quickly, and unless you show that talent now at the very beginning, junior, under 23 level. So many nations now in there. There's so many people fighting for those places. It is definitely more competitive nowadays.
So, Sean, you end up winning the junior Irish championship. Is at that point then you start going over to Europe? At what point do you end up starting to head to some other countries to start racing?
Yes, well, at junior level, that's when I started to travel abroad. And, when I won the Irish Junior Championships, I was selected on the Irish team to go to some races in over in the UK. And then we went to some races in Europe as well. And, at that point, I think people were talking about me a lot in Ireland because I think it was very much, in Ireland, it was dominated around Dublin. That's where all the clubs were, the strong clubs and the better riders. So it was mostly, the people from Dublin who were the ones who were performing best and going away on the national team for many years previous. So I was one of the ones from outside of Dublin. And of course, when you're from the country, as they say here in Ireland, and you're showing a lot of talent, they talk about you a bit more. So I think that was the turning point for me when I started to travel abroad as a junior, and then when I went on to amateur, I started to go over to the Tour of Britain, which was the milk race, and that was a very prestigious race at the time, because you had all the European countries and the East Europeans, and I won a stage there in my first year taking part. So that was a big thing to do, and it just started to gather momentum then. And when I was in the Tour of Britain, I remember my first year, there was some guys over there from France who knew some people in the UK, and they came to talk to me before one of the stages, and they said if I'd ever like to come to France to a club, I'd be always welcome. And yeah, that's what I did a bit later on, a year or a year and a half later.
Yeah, talk about that, because I spoke to a couple people leading up to this interview. And it seems to me that even when you started winning over in France and in Britain, that you still weren't set or ready to turn pro. Matter of fact, you were offered a pro contract, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but you were offered a pro contract, but declined it and went back to Ireland to ride with your club. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a matter of declining and going back to Ireland. When I was out in France riding with an amateur club in Metz, which is up near the Luxembourg border, I went there in '75 after riding the Tour of Britain, and I went there with quite good shape after the Tour of Britain, won quite a lot of races immediately. I was winning races, and right to the end of that season, until the very end of September, I was doing well, and actually won the amateur Tour of Lombardy, which was quite a big thing, because the president of the club, he was an Italian living in France, so he took us down there for a few races at the end of the season. And there was people saying to me, yeah, this guy is talking about in professional teams. So there was names being mentioned like Cyril Guimard and John de Gribaldi. And, some of the names, Guimard, of course, I would have heard by that time. And de Gribaldi, a little bit less. But, I continued on that year. And then at the end, with the club, the amateur club decided I'd come back the following year and went back to Ireland. And then Gribaldi arrived over, I think it was in about November, suddenly out of the blue. He just got a plane to Dublin, then got a taxi down, which was 100 miles south from Dublin where I lived, wow, and arrived at my parents' place in the afternoon, late afternoon. And my mother was there around the farmyard, and they came in, and I was gone away on the tractor collecting a trailer or something. So she sent him out the road where I would be coming back, and I just met him on the road, and they came back to the house, and we had this talk about turning professional, and I said yes, maybe, and I said I'd think about it. So they went away, and I said, look, give me a little bit of time to think about it. And the reason being, I want to think about it. I had promised the club in Metz to come back, so I wanted to call them first and say, look, I have this offer to become professional. I just wanted to go up front with them. And that was the reason, I suppose. And the other reason, I was still quite young, and I felt maybe I wasn't ready to become professional, and concerned that if I signed a professional contract too early, too young, not ready, I just might get burned out and not be ready for it. So I felt maybe another year would do me good as an amateur there in France.
Mm. Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question of... You're growing up in this small town, you start cycling, and it's really a pretty short window where you go from just riding with your brother, doing some of these local races, and next thing you know, you're almost on the world stage. You're over in France, you're racing. Was there a point where it was truly just kind of overwhelming, or you're pinching yourself going, I can't even believe that this is happening right now?
Well, yeah, that was true. I was surprised that I was that was winning races, but also very happy. And I was really happy out there. When I went out to the club, the amateur club in Metz, I was staying there in an apartment, and there was two guys from New Zealand who had been there already the previous year. So, they were a great help to me because, they were speaking English. I didn't have any French at all. They had some little bit of French. But I was really enjoying it, and getting away, I suppose, from the Irish Sea and the races that I was doing in Ireland, and going to these races in France where they were much bigger, much more colour and much more people around. It was such a buzz, and when you could win a race occasionally, well, then that made it all the sweeter.
Mm. Did you feel a lot of pressure representing Ireland at this point? Being you're at the time, cycling is not huge in Ireland, but you've got yourself kind of coming up through the ranks. You're over in France racing. Did you feel pressure from that?
Well, when I went away on the Irish team as a junior, that was definitely pressure. And then when when I went to the Tour of Britain and went to races, Tour of Scotland and other ones as well, there was pressure. There was definitely pressure there because it was an Irish team, and I think between ourselves in the team, there was probably pressure to just be the best one on the team also, because there wasn't any situation or agreement where a guy was a better one or a protected rider. Everybody had their equal chance in the race. You just got out there and you raced like hell. And if you made the breakaway and it went on, you could win a stage. And that's exactly what I did in the Tour of Britain. Managed to get myself into a break, around the middle of the halfway point in the race, and won in a sprint. And that was amazing. And the question of pressure, that was there with the national team. But when I went to France, there wasn't that big pressure, but still I wanted to do well, and I wanted to prove to the club that I could win races. And of course, when you get the taste of winning as well in France, you want to win more. And I think the most important thing is when I went to that club, they gave me an apartment, but you had to feed yourself. They took you to the races. They gave you a bike and they gave you gear, but you had to your normal civvies. You had to dress yourself. You had to feed yourself. So the race was a way of making some money. And when you're in those races, there's premiums in some of the races when you go through the finish area. So that was something that we really were up for, to get some money out of the races because we needed to survive out there.
Yeah. Was it tough staying away from the limelight or being in another country, making some money? I'm sure it's a bunch of young guys. It's got to be somewhat of a party environment too. Were you set on this path that, hey, I'm here to ride a bike, I'm here to race, represent the club, or did you ever have times where the lifestyle of living overseas started interfering with your goals?
No, not at all. I suppose it depends on your background and your upbringing. And I was brought up on a farm in the country. It wasn't that I was in a big city where maybe you might go out on a weekend with some friends. That was a pretty rare one in the region that I came from in Ireland. So I didn't miss that, getting out on the weekends with my friends. And, when you go to races, you're on the way back after the race, you stop for something to eat, and you might have a beer or two or three, depending on how you did during in the race and how much money you had in your pocket. So I really was enjoying it out there and not missing at home at all. Wasn't homesick. Which was, something that a lot of riders that came from Ireland and went away to the continent, they did miss home and miss, their home life. Some of them, maybe they were a bit of a mammy boy and really never settled. And, they they had a lot of talent. But if you're not settled out there, well, then it's very difficult, to be fully focused and committed, for your training and your racing.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody else, and they've got a friend who's a professional athlete, and we were talking about the difference that you can have somebody with immense talent, or you can have somebody with an outstanding work ethic. But it's rare to have those two combine. And in researching this, Sean, that was one of the things that kind of stood out is one, this natural ability, but a work ethic that not many people had. Is that something that just kind of came natural from your time growing up on the farm?
Well, I think, as you say, talent, you have to have a certain amount. And, the more you have, well, then the better you're going to do. Then work ethic is the other thing. But when you go abroad, for example, if you're not happy out there, well, then it starts to work on you slowly. And I think those things, especially a work ethic, that, suffers. And you don't put in the training, the amount of training, the quality of training, and also you're not focused. So that can really have an effect on your results and your career going forward. But I certainly had the work ethic. I think being reared on a farm. As I mentioned earlier, when I was about 8 or 9, you get up in the morning time when I was going to school, and certainly when I was on holidays, on the summer holidays, my father would call me and he would say, well, you go out and get the cows into to be milked, and he would get the area ready to milk them. And when we had the cows in, then we would have our breakfast, and then after breakfast we would start the milking. So I had that I suppose that ethic of working on the farm. And when I went abroad, then when I had to train, get up in the morning, go training, come back, rest for a bit, maybe do a bit more training afternoon. I already had that. Yeah. So I think that helped me, but it wasn't something that I had a problem with. It was just something, it was natural for me, so it was an easy thing to do. But then when I went professional, of course, that was more important again, because there, that work ethic, and also, to have a time frame where you have to do things every day during the week of training and all of that. I was able to manage that and work to that very well.
If you don't mind, let's just quickly talk about what happened with your experience of being banned from the Olympics, and how that maybe propelled you into your professional career a little earlier than you had initially expected.
Well, that was it came about in the Tour of Ireland in '75. There was a Scottish team riding, and there was 2 Scottish riders who had went out to South Africa the previous year, and they came talking to us. I was riding with the Irish team with Pat McQuaid, his brother Kieran McQuaid. Pat McQuaid, of course, who was president of the UCI for many years, they said there's this race in South Africa, the Rapport Tour. It's about, I think it was about 8 or 10 days. Very late in September, maybe, or October. Pat McQuaid was probably the figure, he talked about it a lot, and he was talking to me, and he said, yeah, we'll go for it, because, we'll go out there and we're riding as a GB team, we're riding under false names. Nobody will ever know, and it'd be great, to get some late racing in the year. It would, carry us on into the following year, Olympic year. We'll also get a holiday, because the sponsors, I remember, it was a perfume sponsor, Mum for Men. They gave us a minibus to go touring around for a week or 10 days afterwards, all expenses paid. So, it was a trip of, it was a dream trip for me, because I was only, 19 years of age, I think, at the time. And for the others also. We decided we'd go. And we were in the race in South Africa, and we were in a town called Port Elizabeth, and the stage finished there, and it was Liz Taylor was on her second honeymoon with Burton, and they were in the town the same afternoon, and there was a lot of the British tabloids around. So they said they'd make the story with this British team, and they came to the race finish, and they started talking with the manager, who was a South African guy, and he said, "Oh no, you can't talk to the riders. They're focused on the race. You can't distract them." And I think he smelled something that wasn't right, so he started taking photographs from distance, from long range. And he sent him back to Ireland, or sent him back to the British Cycling. And they said, well, those guys are not members of the British Cycling Federation. They are, from Scotland and Ireland. And that's how we got caught. And that's how we got thrown out of the Olympics.
Well, there's two parts to that. So at what point is that? Oh shit, Liz Taylor's here. There's a whole lot of cameras. This thing, it might go south on us quick. And then the second part is how much of an impact was that for you personally? Was that, was the Olympics something you had set in your mind, or were you more focused on racing some of the spring classics, some of the big races in Europe?
No, I was certainly looking forward to going to the Olympics, and we were on the Olympic panel, which was maybe about 8 riders or 10 riders. So I think we had a really good chance of being selected on the Irish team and getting to the Olympics. But when we came back from South Africa, of course, it had already blown up here that we were out in this race in South Africa. So there was a lot of politics going on, and within Irish cycling, there was a lot of people out to get us, because they knew if we weren't in line to go to the Olympics, then they would have the opportunity to get on the team or their club ride or whatever. So it all started coming out, and then we got suspended. We got suspended for a number of months over the winter time, and then we served that suspension. We came back, I think it was in about March or April, and we were doing quite well. I remember we went to the Tour of the North, which was the Tour of the North of Ireland, and I won that one. So we were very much in the reckoning to be selected. But then the Olympic Council decided anybody competing in South Africa was suspended from taking part in the Olympic Games for life. So that changed my whole outlook then, and it was that point then I started thinking, well, I'm not going to the Olympics. I'm not going to hang around in Ireland all the year. So I decided to take up the offer with the club in France. And that's when I went out to the club as an amateur at the end of that year in '76.
What's the first years of a professional cyclist? The language barrier had to be somewhat of an issue. What was the language that was mostly spoken on the team that you're on?
Well, it was French. The club I was in there, it was very much French. But when I became professional, of course, it was with Jean de Garibaldi. That was a French team, mostly French riders. But cycling back in the 70s and 80s, it was all French. Everything around the race. When you went to a race in France, or if you went to a race in Belgium, the language spoken was French. Where later on in my career, it started to change a lot. And I think the thing I remarked most was when I was in the peloton. Everybody was speaking French, but if you had somebody speaking English, you'd look around to see who it was, because you wanted to get close to them and have a chat with them. Where that changed so much, in the mid '80s during my career, and then towards the end of my career, there was so much English speakers in the peloton. You took it as normal then, but in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, rare that you would hear anybody English speaking, because there was very few Anglo-Saxons in the peloton.
Yeah. So how do you manage that? Because anyone who knows cycling knows that you're usually riding for a team leader, and there's a lot of tactics. There's a lot of communication that has to go on. How are you managing through that? Are you picking up French quickly? Are they trying to interpret in English for you? What does that look like?
Well, you learn very, very quickly when you're in there, and I can tell you when you're in France nowadays, it's quite different, because so many people speak English. But when I went over to France to find somebody that would understand English, there were very, very few. So it meant you had to learn it quickly. And the first 5 or 6 months I gave as amateur, I learned a lot there, because it was a full-time school, and that's what I say. As a cyclist, it's a great opportunity. The people that go abroad to compete in France, or if you compete in Italy, just to learn another language. If you want to learn it and you're keen to do it, then you can learn it very quickly. And I did pick up a lot of French in my first 5 or 6 months when I went to France for the first time. And then, of course, when I became professional for the first couple of years, got topped up on my French and became very good, and was able to, I suppose, about a year and a half, I was able to understand pretty much everything.
Wow. What's interesting looking at your career in a season where nowadays you see guys, they'll peak for a small period of time throughout a cycling season. A lot of your wins, they started in some of the spring classics, and then they continued throughout the entire season. Was that just a different type of training then? Were guys trying to peak for certain races, or was it, hey, I'm going to be as strong as I can from the beginning of the season to the end?
Yeah, it was a different type of training, and also a different type of racing. And I think that's the important one. The racing, back in my day, it wasn't anything as intense and as competitive as it is now. So you take the riders of my era. You take, the Bernardino, Laurent Fignon, Greg LeMond, all of those guys. They would race the early part of the year, and they would be trying to win those races. Some of the classic races, Paris-Nice. I had many battles with Eno, Fignon, and all those guys. And then you would go to some of the classics like the Ardennes classics, but also some of the Cobble classics. The guys who would be aiming for the Tour of France in July, they will be trying to win those races, where that changed a lot, later on. And the guys now, they focus more on a period of maybe a month to 6 weeks, and then they have a time out. They go away to these training camps now, altitude and all of that, these altitude camps, and then they have later on the year targets. That wasn't the case at all. You just raced all the year from the time the season opened to the season end, and everybody was involved and got involved trying to win races. But yeah, the competition wasn't anything as hard and as intense as it is now, and that's part of the reason as well. Because some people say to me now, okay, you rode 160 races during your career, in your top years during your career. If you look at the guys now, they're riding 70, 80 races. But I would say, the guys are riding 70 or 80 races, but the way they ride them, it's so competitive now. But then when they finish the race, they go to these training camps all the time. There's training camp, altitude camp after camp, and they do a huge amount of miles. So they actually do the same amount of miles per year, or kilometers per year, whatever you want to call it, as I was doing, back in the day, or even more, although I was riding, double the amount of races. So, it's no different now, just that they train more, and not as, the number of races, not as many.
If you look at cycling now, and I think you've really seen it over the past maybe 10 years, some of the psychological effects that cycling, the pressures of cycling, have taken on some of the biggest names. I mean, you look at Pantani and even Tom Dumoulin now having to just take a step back from racing. Do you think the pressures of cycling, because it's grown so much, it's gotten so much attention, do you think the pressures have changed over time? Or is it really similar to the time that you know in the late 70s? Because you've seen you go from the late 70s into the 90s, and what a crazy transformation in the world of cycling to happen to you in real time, I imagine. How do you compare the psychological effects from the time you became a pro towards, I would say, now?
Well, it's totally different. It's night and day, really, because, you know, when I was in there in the earlier days, when I was, you know, at my best years, the 80s, 83, 84, 85, 86, when I was, you know, at my best and winning, you know, so many races every year, the pressure wasn't anything like it is of recent times, meaning in the last 10 years. And, you know, there's a number of things, I suppose. You know, the teams now, the salaries the riders are getting. So the sponsors are looking for results all the time. And, you know, that puts pressure on the team direction to put the pressure on the riders to get results all the time. And social media, that is the other thing, because, you know, you have that pressure all the time now. You know, it just doesn't end after the race. When you finish your race, you do post-race interview. It goes on all afternoon, evening time, night time, into the night. Social media is a thing which the team push as well, that they have to get involved with, and, you know, all of that. So you can't just get away from it and, you know, just tune out and get it out of your head and maybe read a book, read the local paper, have a chat with your teammate, which you're sharing room with. You know, it's just there all the time, and that is the reason now that, you know, it's having such an effect mentally on a lot of the riders. Yeah. And cycling is a sport as well. Let's not forget the races. You know, they can be 4 or 5 hours. The classic races, they can be longer. So, you know, that is a big amount of time to keep your focus on the racing. Then the race finish, you have to do all that post-race stuff with, you know, TV and all the press, that stuff. And then you get to your hotel and it continues on with social media. So there's so many hours in the day. It goes on for so long. That is the reason it's having an effect on a lot of the riders. And of course, yeah, the big pressures from the teams as well. You know, that's always there. Where when I was there in the 80s, you know, we would start off in the month of February, and I would, you know, the first races, it would be very relaxed. The first four or five weeks, they would be totally chilled out, and we wouldn't have to, you know, perform. It was when we got to March, for example, that's the time the serious stuff would start. So we start the end of January, and I remember with Greg LeMond, for example, you know, he would come back and he would have quite a few kilos put on, and he would do it year after year. And I remember he would say to me, "Oh man, I'm never doing this again. I'm never leaving myself go so bad in the winter time." But every year it was the same. And before, you know, he was able to get away with it, and, you know, I was able to get away with it, not having to train as much. And, you know, certainly nowadays, I have seen it. The first race of the season is full on, it's full gas, and if you're not ready and, you know, fully trained, well, then you're not going to be able to stay in the race. You're going to be out of the race very, very quickly. So, you know, I think that just tells that pressure. Pre-season also, there's that pressure to get ready and to do, you know, the miles you have to do. You have to do the endurance stuff. You have to do the intensity stuff to be ready for racing. You know, it's a total different time, you know, and there's a big, you know, huge stress now for the riders.
Yeah, I was interested in watching an interview. I think it might have been with Phil Liggett, where you actually mentioned, I I step away from the bike. I forget the time period, maybe 2 months, and you know, you're just working on the farm, you're riding a tractor, and I would imagine there's cyclists now that would watch that and go, "Oh man, what I would do to be able to just step away from everything for a couple months."
Yes, well, I think the race calendar as well has changed all of that. I can understand, when the guys hear that you get off the bike maybe for 4 or 5 weeks, and then you start back doing very light training back in my day, where now the guys, they maybe take 2 weeks or 3 weeks off, depending on what time you finish your season. If you do the end of season, well then you're limited the amount of time you can take out off the bike. And of course, now we have the races Tour Down Under. All those races, they start in January. Yeah. And they're very important races. They're World Tour races. So it means, that the pressure is on, again, on the riders, on the teams to perform. And the season is running on very, very late as well. Where, when I was in there in the mid-'80s, and even towards the end of my career, the early season races, the first couple of weeks were pretty relaxed, and that meant a lot, because you could come back in, get to the feel of racing again. Of course, you had to have that amount done that you could just be comfortable in the race, but you could build your fitness in the racing in the first 4 or 5 weeks, where now that's not possible.
Mm. When I said that you were in cycling at such an interesting time, in the advancement of just the technology side, from the time you start as a pro until the 90s, I mean, there's a significant difference. I mean, we're going into clipless pedals, carbon fiber, different metal materials, and then on the on the human performance side, it's certainly not something I want to dwell on. But do you think it's the demands of cycling, the amount of suffering that goes into being a professional cyclist, is why so many riders have found alternative ways to increase their human performance?
Well, I think it's the pressure of having to compete at a high level and to perform at a top level, and that means winning races. Yeah. And as I said again, in my day, the pressure wasn't anything like it was, in the mid-end of 90s, and from there on, like the Tour de France, it was minute compared to what it is now. So the teams were under pressure to compete, and that meant that they were putting the riders under pressure. Mm. And we all know where it went. Yeah. It was organised within the teams. Right. The doping that went on, it was within the teams which that structure was in there, because if you weren't in there, well then to compete against the teams that were, it was impossible. Yeah. And we all know about that. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's the way it went for many years, until the governing body UCI started to catch up. But again, I always say, if the Tour de France was an average of 3 or 4 kilometers per hour slower, we would still have the same excitement, the same spectacle. That would have been still there. Yeah. But it was just that pressure to have results within the teams, from the teams, and that's where it all lit. And of course, you had the doctors involved in the teams. Yeah. And all of that, and it snowball effects, and it just got totally out of control. Mm.
Going back to the difference of riding, you can look at a rider like Ireland Sam Bennett, and he's winning the green jersey. I mean, he dominated the Tour last year. You yourself won the green jersey, and I believe it was the year after you're trying to win the yellow jersey. And I think there's a distinct difference in cycling, where it used to be you were an all-around rider, where now guys are in this specialty. So to watch an interview with you and say, hey, yeah, I won the green jersey, but I'm you know, if I can get the same fitness I had in the Tour de Suisse, I think I have a good chance at winning the Tour. That's almost unheard of now. I mean, can you imagine one of the top sprinters saying, hey, I'm going to try and win the overall next year?
Yes, well, you know, that's, again, it's just the level of the competition at the moment. The guys, you know, they prepare specifically, you know, for the classics. They prepare specifically for the mountain stages in the big tours or the flat stages. Where, you know, back in my time, it was more of a mix, and there wasn't that great difference between the real climbers and, you know, the not so good climbers. So you could survive for quite a lot of time. You could stay in there. Where now it's just it's an impossible task to do that, and that's why, you know, we don't see these guys. You know, the sprinters, they have no chance in the mountain stages at all to stay anywhere near the front end of the race. They're just fighting to finish and to stay inside the time limit. And, you know, you see those guys like the sprinters, you know, Ewan, Bennett, even Sagan, who's a better climber. They have to fight to get in on some of the days for the time limit.
Yeah.
You know, that just shows that, you know, the difference between the different specialists within the race.
You certainly continued with the world of cycling even after retirement, which you see some guys do, but you see other guys, they just totally fall off the map. They want nothing to do with the sport. You can take, you know, Miguel Indurain, wins 5 tours, punches out, and you rarely see the guy anymore. You've continued. You're commentating for Eurosport for the Tour de France. You're currently involved in a product. It's a mount system. If you could explain what's involved in that and what you're doing with it.
Yes, well, first of all, I suppose I was lucky at the end of my career because there was a guy working for Eurosport, and he was a very big fan of mine, David Duffield, and he was on to me immediately when I was coming to the end of my career, and he said, you'll have to come on and do some commentary with me for the classics. And that's where it started off, and then it led into the tour. And, you know, I just went in there totally raw. They just gave me the head cams and off I went. And I didn't know what I was doing. You know, they'd be talking about, oh, we're coming to a queue. What is the queue?
Right.
That's how bad it was. But yeah, slowly I learned, and I can tell you the first couple of races I didn't enjoy it at all. But then I got the hang of it, and it went on from there, and I enjoy it now. And I suppose it keeps your hand in going to the races in normal times to the tour, and I meet so many of my old friends as well. When I go back to the Tour of France, it's amazing how many of the old pros you meet there, because they come on the Tour of France and they're driving a local journalist or just a local paper around for the 3 weeks, and they love doing that. And we meet up and we meet so many of our buddies that we competed against, teammates and rival teams and all of that. So that has been great. And sometimes they say in life you have to have a little bit of luck on your side. So I think the commentary one, that was lucky for me. And now I'm still doing it. And of recent there, the outdoor velo attachment, it's something that we've been looking at probably for at least a year and a half. And this guy Stephen, who's a guy who was a sort of a design engineer, he had this idea. So we started working on it, and we changed it a bit. Then we go back and change again. So it's something where you can put your phone and your iPad on, and it just attaches onto the handlebars, very, very quickly fitted, and you have it all there at your fingertips. And I have been using, these devices, indoor trainers, a lot, and you have a table there which just you have your phone or whatever else you need, and it's not very stable. So for that reason, we decided to launch this outdoor velo bike attachment. And we feel now that it's ready, and we have done what needs to be done. I think it's ready. It's ready to go out to the market.
Yeah, I mean, talk about timely. I mean, it's a perfect time to come up with something like this now that so many people are riding inside. Depending on where you live, you can't go too far from the house. And this, I watched the video, and the ability to Zoom with some other riders and almost have a group ride from inside seems, it just seems like this is a really good time to have something like that.
Well, definitely, this Zwift training app, that is something which is really taken off, and there's a few other platforms. But yeah, it's definitely that time now. No matter where in the world you are, there is times during the year where people just want to do their training indoors. And yeah, the training probably have changed a bit as well now. Even the guys who are doing the competition at amateur level, they're not doing these long training hours. Yeah. It's more intense stuff, the way they're preparing for the racing season. So yeah, the indoor stuff, I think it's there for the future, and we're going to see more and more of that. Also, people coming into biking, I think, when they start out, the safety of going out on the open roads and that, they don't feel comfortable, so they start off doing that. But then they do eventually start to go out a bit on the open roads more when they're more confident. So I think that's the reason that we decided to go for this the indoor velo, and we will see how it will go. I think it's something that it should do quite well, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree. Sean, this is really huge for me. Like I said, I grew up watching you. To sit here and talk to you is it's a highlight for me, and in the process of this podcast. And I very much appreciate you spending the time coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to cover? Why have you on?
Well, no, it's great. It's great to talk to you, and that is something that I still come up against when I'm doing events. I go abroad to do some events, and you meet people who follow your career, and they can start talking about races, the Paris-Roubaix and Milan-San Remos, and it's great to talk to you here today and talk to the listeners, and bikers that follow my career might be listening into this one, and they say, "Oh yeah, I remember the Sean Kelly guy," and they had followed. And the great thing is when you meet those people on an event, on a leisure event, or maybe you're out in the sunshine down in Spain or Mallorca. I do quite a lot of biking down there, and I meet people, even now that they followed my career, and each year I might meet one or two guys who followed me all the way through my professional career. And for those guys, that is an amazing thing. And that's the great thing about biking, because you can go out there and you can ride along for an hour or two with those guys. And it's great that I can do that as well, give that back to cycling, which has been so good to me.
Yeah. I had one story. I was flying into Belgium, and I grew up, my dad had an Eddie Merckx bike, and it was one of the last years they were actually making them steel frame in Belgium, and he had given it to me, and I was in for a work trip, so I landed, and most of those flights are overnight flights, so I hadn't slept at all, and I took like 3 different trains and a couple buses, and I walked maybe a mile or two to get to Eddie Merckx's factory, because I was told that sometimes he hangs out in the factory, and as I'm walking there, I see these military planes flying in formation above. And I go, what the heck's going on? Well, it turns out it was a national holiday in Belgium, in Brussels. Well, everything was closed. So the closest I got to Eddie Merckx was to stand outside the Eddie Merckx factory. So that was, was there an opportunity where you actually were in races with Eddie?
Yes. Well, when I started out, of course, Eddie was at the end of his career. But I did race with him. The first year and a half I raced with him, and that was amazing, because when you become professional, and Merckx was the one, as I mentioned earlier in our chat, that he was the one that followed his career, and he was my hero, as there were many others. I remember Jamondi and a lot of the other guys. So going into the race with those guys, that was an unbelievable feeling. And of course, I lived in Belgium then for many years, and I wasn't living far from Eddie's factory. Actually, it was only about 5k down the road.
Oh, okay.
So on my training ride, I used to pass by the factory a lot, and bumped into him on more than one occasion. It was even at the end of my career, or towards the end of my career, meeting Merckx, that was an unbelievable feeling, because for me, like, he was an amazing, because when you look at the races and the race program that he was doing, doing all the classics, all maybe 2 of the big tours, then the end of season classics, then he would do the 6 days. That guy, if he had been around many years later, where there was more of a structure to his race program, well, then I think he would have won many more 3-week tours.
Yeah. I hope this doesn't come across as an insult, but my dog's name is Merckx. I named my dog because I was such a big fan of the guy. So, but Sean, I don't want to hold you anymore. But again, if people want to find out more about the indoor velo, they want to follow you on social, how can they do that?
Well, if you just Google indoor velo, that you will find it, and you can follow Sean at Sean Kelly CC.
Awesome.
You can get us there. But good to talk to you, and hi everybody.
All right, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oof. Yeah, that was a big one. You're doing well when you got to talk to a guy's manager for an hour before he comes on the podcast. That means we're moving up, everybody. Thanks again to Mr. Sean Kelly. Please check out his indoor velo. Check it out on Kickstarter. The link will be in the show notes. Support these guys and what they're doing. It's a great product. Make sure you check out Sean Kelly on all of his social media. Check him out on Eurosport. And that's it for me. I will see you guys next week.